All right, y'all. Hope everybody's doing good today. So we are going to start talking about topics 6.3 and 6.4 today, and that's continuing on with our study of cities. So for the first topic, we're going to focus on globalization and how cities are the perfect example of a globalized society. So just to review a little bit, globalization, of course, is basically just the fact that our world is super connected now. We are very aware of that in the midst of this coronavirus that's going on right now. But cities are great examples of how the world comes together. And so, one of the greatest examples of globalization is something called world cities. And world cities are basically these cities around our world today that are the top of the urban hierarchy. And what do I mean by that is that they are so influential in influencing other cities around the world as well as other communities around the world. And these world cities help to drive globalization. So the image that you see on the screen right now is of Paris's Fashion Week. And if you think about some of the fashion trends that happen in Paris, they sort of trickle down to the rest of the world. In addition to that, it's another example of hierarchical diffusion. When you think about world cities, a couple of distinguishing characteristics take place to make a city to be a world city. A lot of times, international companies have their headquarters in world cities. They are also financial centers, as well as cities that have global dominance. So the greatest example of a world city is New York City. In addition to being the headquarters of the United Nations, as well as Wall Street, which is basically the world's financial market, kind of runs off of what Wall Street does. There's a lot of companies that have their headquarters in New York City. A great example of that is Macy's. If you've ever been in New York City, Macy's is kind of the icon department store that's on in kind of the downtown of Times Square. I remember the last time I went to New York City, there's literally like 7 stories in the Macy's. So that's just an example how international companies have their headquarters there. Financial centers, Wall Street, the New York Stock Exchange is there. And so we have 3 cities that we consider to be the greatest global or world cities. London, New York, and Tokyo are the top 3. Paris is also considered a world city, but it's kind of on the 4th string. So we're going to do a little bit of looking at each of these cities and classify and kind of go over how they are examples of world cities. And so to start off with, we've got New York City. So I've got a couple of images here just to kind of show you why New York is a global. The first one here is an image of Wall Street. And Wall Street, of course, is where the New York Stock Exchange is. We can kind of judge how the economy of our country is doing, and then also the economy of the world by what's happening on Wall Street. To give you an example, with this coronavirus epidemic that's going on right now, Wall Street and the stock market has actually fallen. And so we've started to see kind of speculation. Are we going to go into a recession again and that kind of stuff? So, Wall Street helps to determine the health of the economy of our country. New York also hosts a lot of cultural events. New York City's Fashion Week is just one of those cultural events where the world takes notice. People pay attention to what's happening in New York City. The building that you see down here, this is the United Nations building. Kind of gave it away there with all of the flags. The United Nations, of course, is the world's most important supranational organization, and its headquarters are in New York City. The image that you see here is of the One World Trade Center. In addition to that being a landmark for the terrorist attacks that happened in September 11th, when you think about what that building actually is, it is the center of world trade. So a lot of trade deals, a lot of dealings with globalization happen in that building. So New York City, definitely a great example of a global city. Tokyo is next. Tokyo, remember we talked about in the previous topics, is the largest city and surrounding area in the world. Tokyo, of course, is in Japan, and the imprint of Tokyo on the rest of the world is largely felt. Just to kind of give you an example, if we look over here, as far as the urban footprints felt around the world, we can see that Tokyo is one of those largest cities as far as the sheer size of the city. In addition to that, hold on, sorry about that. Let me go back. There we go. In addition to that, a lot of the economic activities of Asia are centered in the city of Tokyo. If you look at the statistics down here, about 48% of Japanese corporations are located in Tokyo. About 18% of Japan's universities and about 21% of public facilities are concentrated in Tokyo. Japan really emerged as a globalized city after World War II, when the United States and the Allies helped to rebuild Japan. And the legacy of Tokyo and its imprint is felt all over the world. And you can see how densely populated Tokyo is by this image. If you think about the cars that a lot of you or your family members drive, a lot of those, come from Japan. A lot of those company headquarters are in Tokyo. Honda, Nissan are just a few examples of those Japanese car companies. All right.
Donald Wells, South 3422. Donald Wells,
Sorry about
South
that, guys.
3422.
Announcement interruption. Okay, so we're going to take a look at London and how London is an example of a global city. And I think the best way to do that, I've got a video clip that I'm going to show you. This, of course, is an aerial view of the beautiful city of London. So we're going to take a look here at how London is an example of a global city.
For about 10 years now, on and off, I've lived in London, where life takes place under an endlessly grey sky, or at least that's what it feels like. But when I think of my hometown, Sydney, I think of the colour blue. That's the sky and the ocean there for most of the year. In London, there's the daily crash of the tube. We're getting growled at or sniffed.
The tube, of course, is what the Londoners call the subway.
Seized on is all generously included in the ticket price. While in Sydney, I could commute by ferry across one of the most beautiful harbours in the world. And in London, there are people, so many people, everywhere. In Sydney, everyone gets their own beach. Not quite, but you get the idea. Now, kicking London brings no pleasure. I love this place. Truly, it's my adopted home. But I was surprised recently, so were many of my colleagues, mostly Brits, when we learned that this challenging, often infuriating city had topped a list of the world's best cities. And when you think about the competition, we wanted to know, how is that possible? Accounting giant PricewaterhouseCoopers released two studies. One, a survey of around 5,000 people measuring the perceptions of international cities. The other, an analysis of the facts. Sydney came 5th for perception, 10th for reality. London is number 1 in both rankings. London scored very highly for international connections, well-developed infrastructure and legal frameworks, political influence, and being a leader.
All right, so I want to make sure and touch on a couple of key points there. Mention the word infrastructure. Infrastructure is any kind of transportation or communication system that helps to link people together. London's subway system is one of the most advanced in the world. London's busing system, one of the most advanced in the world. London's political influence, if you think about the legacy of the British Empire, even though the Brits don't control all of the territory that they used to control, their legacy, their impact is still felt all over the world. If you think about the news, when William and Kate got married, the royal family in London, it was headlines all around the world. So London has a huge influence.
That could be because most of those surveyed are described as informed elites and business decision makers, a demographic also known as those who regularly wear suits. Best city in the world, go.
London.
Why London?
Cosmopolitan, business, ease of access, rule of law.
Yeah, it's a great city.
You've noticed the colour of the sky though, right?
Yeah, if it could also have the weather of Australia, it'd be even better.
Wouldn't it just? For affordability, London ranked close to the bottom of the list. That's not news to those who live across town far from the suits. But most still agree, this is the best city in the world.
There's no place on earth that can compare with London. It might be a little bit expensive, but hey, don't worry about that. Forget that.
It's hard to forget that though, because it is really expensive.
It is really expensive. They say it's one of the most expensive places in the world, but listen, everywhere is expensive at the moment.
Andrew Cook works for the agency which is paid to promote London's good image abroad. There is a real risk that London's perception internationally could take a hit because of Brexit, right?
Well, I think where there's uncertainty, and clearly
Brexit, of course, is this video is a couple of years old. Brexit has happened since this video has been produced, and that is when the UK left the European Union.
it is causing some uncertainty at the moment, then there is a risk to business.
Ultimately, London finished first by performing strongly in most categories, despite its famous weaknesses. Londoners have learned how to endure those. What about the weather?
Forget the weather.
So forget the weather, forget how expensive it is.
Yeah.
Forget the traffic.
Forget the traffic. Yeah, forget all that. Don't look at the negative side.
Phil Black, CNN, reporting from arguably the best city in the world.
All right. Is London the best city in the world? Never been there. Sounds like we're going to have to take a road trip to see if that's true. But definitely the influence felt by London is something that is definitely not argued. London has a huge influence on globalization in our world. All right. So the next global city is Paris. Paris, of course, is in France. So I have a couple of pictures here. I had the opportunity to go to Paris several times, and it is by far one of my favorite cities I've ever been to. The first picture, of course, most famous landmark in Paris, and that's the Eiffel Tower. This image right here is one of Paris's most famous shopping districts. It's called the Champs-Élysées, and it is so much shopping. You can get crepes, you can get all kinds of amazing things there. And then this image here, rest in peace. This is the Notre Dame Cathedral. This is in the heart of the city. This, of course, was taken before the famous fire that destroyed a lot of the cathedral. But we're going to watch another video clip about Paris and see how Paris's influence is felt all over the world.
Megacity always seems to be at the forefront of progressive movements, whether it's innovation in its cuisine, couture, infrastructure, or governance. This refuge for the rebel, artist, philosopher, and scientist has always held a place in the hearts of romantics and vanguards alike. Because here, in the City of Light, engineers and artists often share a line of sight. This is Paris, the grand megacity. 2,300 years ago, a group of Celtic Gauls called the Parisii settled on the Ile de la Cité, a small island in the middle of the Seine. After falling
Seine is the river that runs through Paris.
into the hands of the Roman Empire, the town grew until the empire collapsed a short time later. Clovis, the first king to unite all the Frankish tribes in Paris, is the origin of the name Louis, taken by 18 subsequent French monarchs. For the next 1,000 years, or the period known as the Middle Ages, Paris saw rulers, religions, wars, and plagues come and go as it became the largest city in Europe. Home to one of the first universities and the birthplace of Gothic architecture, Paris was ground zero for the Enlightenment. Philosophies embracing individual liberty, religious tolerance, and the scientific method were perfectly captured by the phrase sapere aude, dare to know. In the end, the monarchy and the church were simply overmatched by the sheer power of a set of ideas whose time had come, ideas that were spread far and wide by books and pamphlets. The stage was set for revolution. On the afternoon of July 14th, 1789, the Bastille, a medieval fortress and prison symbolizing royal authority in the center of Paris, was overtaken by force. It was the opening move in a 10-year struggle that featured the bloody overthrow of the monarchy.
That image right there is of the famous guillotine, which killed lots of people during the French Revolution, one of its more radical phrases. Obviously, you can kind of see how the guillotine ended the lives of its victims through chopping off their heads. So even though Paris has always been a great example of a world city, during the French Revolution, it was a lot more bloody than most in history.
The establishment of the French Republic and violent political turmoil. The dictatorship of Napoleon followed, delivering many principles of the revolution to much of Western Europe. By the middle of the 1800s, Paris had well over 1 million people, but was made up of tight streets and overpopulated, filthy alleyways. Life for many was a miserable, day-to-day struggle in disease-ridden slums. So Napoleon's nephew, who would become emperor himself, set out to make the city healthier, less congested, and grander. He turned to a clever man full of audacity and skill, the visionary urban planner Baron Haussmann. He imagined the modern city as a living organism, with the boulevards its arteries. Over the next 17 years, the duo oversaw the most epic public works spree since ancient Rome. Tens of thousands of workers were hired to carry out their plans, which included completely rebuilding the sewer system and installing hundreds of kilometers of pipes inside of it to distribute gas for thousands of new streetlights, 2 brand new rail stations connecting Paris to the rest of France, and more than 20 parks to ensure that none was more than a 10 minutes walk away from anyone.
A little bit later this week, we're going to talk about something called new urbanism or smart growth. And that all of that is characterized by a city's walkability. And Paris is really kind of before its time with regards to this. Paris is a very walkable city with the parks and all that stuff. But also one of the things that helped to embrace or helped to make Paris truly a world city is its ability to be accessed by other places. The railroad stations in Paris that were built could be accessed from pretty much every major European city. And that really helped to shape Paris as kind of a hub of travel in Europe.
But the innovation that most transformed the city was Haussmann's dedication to wide boulevards, 12 of which converge on the roundabout circling the Arc de Triomphe.
You can see the kind of the wheel pattern that Paris's streets look like. Makes it very, very easy for traffic, makes it easy for trade, for travel, for accessibility. So truly, definitely a model city for the rest of the world.
Throughout the 30-year undertaking, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced in phases as the entire city became a construction zone. This sacrifice, which wasn't always appreciated by the residents of Paris, was well worth the end result. The discipline to keep the buildings lining these avenues the same height, all faced with similar colored stone, created a striking visual effect. Over the next 100 years, Paris was thankfully spared the widespread destruction suffered by many other capitals in the wars and conflicts that unfolded across Europe. When the unthinkable happened in 1940 and Nazi flags were raised throughout Paris during the German occupation, Hitler declared the city too beautiful to bomb.
You know it's something special when Hitler, one of the world's worst madmen, said that a city couldn't be bombed. So that just tells you how special Paris really is.
Photos show him posing like a tourist at the base of the Eiffel Tower, which was the tallest building in the world at the time of its construction in 1889. Originally planned to be dismantled after 20 years, converting it into a radio tower saved it, and today it is the most visited landmark on the planet. Another signature site is the Louvre. Built and expanded over the course of 8 centuries, what was once the largest building in the world used to be a palace. That changed when the royals were thrown out during the French Revolution. Today, it is the most visited museum in the world.
The Mona Lisa, the image that you just saw, is the most recognizable art piece in the world. And so not only is the Louvre a cultural center of the world, but it's one of the most visited landmarks. And of course, the Eiffel Tower being the most visited site in the world. So that definitely shows you that Paris is truly a world city.
The decades after the French and Allied victory in World War II stretched into the 21st century, Paris remained at the forefront in the battle of ideas, grappling with challenges like how best to educate its students, integrate immigrants and refugees, offer services to its people, and find a balance between security and liberty in the face of terrorism. But Paris has always come through the other side of struggles more unified and stronger. Just 2 weeks after suffering the deadliest attack on French soil since the Second World War, Paris hosted 196 countries in an effort to make progress on climate change. The French government is also focused on making sure the 12 million people who now call Paris home are well supported by world-class infrastructure. As it prepares to host the 2024 Summer Olympics, Paris is aiming to complete 2 mega projects, building 12 more towers in the La Défense financial district on the westernmost end of the 10-kilometer historical axis, and expanding the Paris Metro, adding 4 new lines and 68 stations to a system that is already the most extensive on the continent. These improvements will keep the city thriving for decades and ensure that the next generation of Parisians are positioned to lead on the challenges of the second half of the century.
All right, so we see the subway improvements, the fact that Paris is going to host the Olympics, all of those continue to lead to its influence and impact on the rest of the world as a great example of a world city. All right, so here is our Global Cities Index. This is a couple of years old, but it showed we can see that the top 4, New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo, as far as influencing other places around the world, are in the top 4. And so some breakdowns to let us show how influential those are. The business activity, we can see that the business activity is the highest in New York. And that makes sense with the New York Stock Exchange and Wall Street being open there. Human capital, how much money is brought into that particular city. Information exchange, newspapers, technology, newscasts, networks, all of that is influential there. And then cultural experiences. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City is a great example of that. The Louvre Museum in Paris. All all of those. And then political engagement, how much of the world's politics are discussed and talked about in those cities. So you can see that there are a lot of other American cities that make this list as far as important to the world, but these 4 are considered to be truly global cities. Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, D.C. is on there, all the way down San Francisco and Boston. But when we're talking about truly global cities, these are the top 4. Okay, so moving on to our topic 6.4, and we're going to focus on topics such as urban hierarchy, how our cities are connected, the size and spacing of cities, and then how cities interact with each other. And so we're going to use a couple of different models and examples to help to explain the distribution, so where cities are located, as well as the size. These are very, very important. The AP exam, every release exam that I've looked at has had at least one question about each of these 4 models. So it's very important. So we're going to break those down. Okay, the first one is what's called the rank size rule. And I know you're going to look at this and think, oh my God, there's an equation. This is intimidating. This is hard. I promise you the rank size rule is not difficult to understand. So all you got to do is substitute a number in for this letter N right here to figure out about what the size of that settlement would be. So let's say we're trying to find a country's second largest city. How many people are in the second largest city? Well, if we know the population of the largest settlement of that city there, it's easy to find. So for example, if we're trying to find the second largest city in that particular area, we take half the population of the largest settlement. If we're trying to find the third largest city, we would take a third of the population of the largest city. If we're trying to find the fourth of it, or the fourth largest city, we're going to take 1/4 of the population of the largest city. So to put some real numbers there, if the largest city in a country has a population of 1 million, then to find the second largest city, we would just half it. So half of 1 million is 500,000. If we're trying to find the third largest city, we would just take 1 million and divide that by a third. If we're trying to find the fourth, divide it by a fourth. Okay, so the rank size rule is not as difficult to understand. Now, it's important to understand that no country in our world is going to be exactly perfect with the rank size rule. Okay, so for example, if we look at the United States, New York City's population, according to this information, has about 8.6 million people. Now, Los Angeles is not going to have exactly half of 8.6, but it's going to be pretty close. So if we look at the United States, New York City is number 1. So to fit the rank size rule, the second largest city, Los Angeles, would have to be about half the size of New York City. And if we look at that, 8.6 and about 4 million are about half. Chicago, it should be about a third of the size, which it falls into that category. Houston should be about a fourth of the size. And the fifth largest city, Phoenix, which has actually just recently replaced Philadelphia, is about a fifth of the size. So not exactly perfect, but this follows this rank size rule pretty neatly. There are other countries in our world that show examples of the rank size rule. Germany is a country that also doesn't follow it neatly, but you can see that the largest city in Germany, Berlin, has about 3.5 million people. The next largest city is roughly about half that. The third largest city is roughly about a third of the population. The fourth largest city is roughly about a fourth. And then the fifth largest city is roughly about a fifth. So it's not perfect, but most of the time, if you were to graph these numbers, it should come up sort of resembling a straight line. Now, obviously, not every country in our world follows the rank size rule. If a country doesn't follow the rank size rule, it can either follow the primate city law or nothing at all. And so the second major formula that geographers use to explain the distribution and size of cities is the law of the primate city. The largest settlement or the largest city in that particular area has more than twice as many people as the second largest city. Okay, and so in that case, that city, that largest city that has more than twice as many people, is called the primate city. Mexico is an excellent example of a primate city because Mexico City, which is the largest city in Mexico, is 5 times the size of the second largest city. Okay, I'm going to give you a lot of examples around our world of areas that have primate cities, but there's a couple of issues with a primate city. One of the things that for a country that does not follow the rank size rule, a lot of times it's hard for people who have to travel long distances to reach that settlement. Then a lot of times that primate city has the majority of the money the economics, the cultural centers, the politics. So some of the other places outside of that primate city don't always get those benefits. Okay, so if we're looking at our map here of Mexico, we can see that the population density of Mexico City obviously is humongous compared with other parts of Mexico that are sparsely populated. So we're going to take a look at a couple of videos that help to explain Mexico City being a primate city, and then what are some of the impacts of so many people living in Mexico City. So the title of this is that Mexico City, mega city streets like a jungle.
Greater Mexico City, 22 million people and about 4 million cars. Congestion is a way of life.
Mexico City provides plenty of challenges for drivers, but fortunately, I'm joined by Team Aguri's driver, Salvador Duran, who is Mexican born and bred. And Salvador, I believe you're going to give me a bit of a driving lesson, Mexican style?
Yes, for sure we're doing that in Mexico City, so I'll put my life in your hands, so be careful.
Fingers crossed.
You are going to notice that the traffic laws in Mexico City are a lot different than what you're used to in the United States.
And away we go. So what are the first rules of Mexican driving?
No rules, it's like the jungle.
Okay, I'm coming through, guys.
No rules is what he said.
To be honest, we should have a photo of you on the front of this car and everyone would let us through.
Wow.
You're a hero here in Mexico.
Maybe the other way around.
Should I actually refrain from using my horn?
Yeah, it's better. You know, it's
Okay.
safe.
Okay,
People are so stressed in Mexico City, so
really? But you can understand why. Because the short time I have spent here, the first sort of couple of hours, I thought it was absolutely amazing. And then you realise that getting from A to B is so stressful. Would you ever consider taking public transport? Because, you know, millions of people take the public transport system every day.
I mean, for sure, right now, if we have taken public transportation, we'll save half an hour, but it's too much of a risk. Actually, right now, I would feel safer going in the public transportation than coming here in the car.
You can see how congested and crowded it is.
Championships like Formula Renault 3.5 and NASCAR, but an electric car, that's pretty different.
Well, Formula E for me has made my whole life different, and I love it. It's a series that takes care of all values, and that's why I think Formula E is making a huge step, coming to the city and showing the society that we're a nice movement, that we're trying to protect and to take care of the environment, and we're still having fun while doing it.
There we are.
So we got it.
I've successfully delivered you back in one piece.
So safe. All the stress has gone out, so ready for the race.
Well, Salvador, thank you so much and good luck.
All right. So the driving in Mexico City, since it's a primate city and has a huge number of people, obviously is a challenge. One of the other things that we see when we have primate cities is some levels of inequality. And so what we're going to take a look at here is not only focusing on Mexico City, but it's also focusing on South Africa. And the point of this video is to show the inequality that exists between the wide gap between the wealthy and the poor in some of these areas of the world that have a huge city. You can obviously tell which areas of the city are richer and which areas of the city are poorer. We're going to stop there. we're going to stop there since we're focusing on primate cities. But Mexico City is an excellent example of that primate city because of the huge population there and it being about 20 million people there, about 5 times larger than the next largest city in the Americas. Well, if my screen would come back up. Sorry about that, guys. Having a little technical difficulties. There we go. Maybe. Uh-oh, I'm getting my spinning wheel of death right now. Gotta love technology. Well, sorry about this. Give it just a minute or two and see if it comes back up. All right, let's try this again. All right, here we go. Okay, so our next example of a primate city is Bangkok. Bangkok is the largest city in Thailand, and it is an extreme example of a primate city because Bangkok is over 40 times larger than any other city in Thailand. The numbers that I'm looking at when I did some research on the population of Bangkok, I saw some estimates as low as the population as 5 million, and some estimates having Bangkok's population swelling to 10, 12 million. So a lot of what we see with Bangkok is we simply don't know until Thailand does its next census how many people are living there because people are moving into Bangkok so quickly. Some of the positives of Bangkok being a primate city, it's a center of politics, of finance, of culture, communication. So people want to go there to get in on the action. They want to go there to get jobs, to have opportunities for entertainment. But at the same time, in the image that you see down in the bottom, Bangkok and other primate cities around the world do face problems. How to deal with just simply this huge influx of people. What that leads to, things like excessive amount of waste. I thought this was interesting, having this boar here, all the waste of the city. What are some transportation issues? How are we going to get people from one place to the other? Poor planning, and then this rapid industrialization and urbanization leads to the creation of slums. Okay, so the next very, very, very important model/theory that we're going to talk about is something called the central place theory. This has literally been on every single AP exam, and it's very important. So the central place theory was created by a geographer named Walter Kristaller, and it uses a pattern of hexagons to locate what he calls a central place. The central place, as far as geography goes, is basically just the market center or a city. And the center of that market deals with the exchanging of goods and services. Goods are things that you buy that are tangible products. Services are things that you buy that you can't necessarily touch. So an example of a service would be like a haircut. And so how those different cities interact with each other. So the central place obviously is located in the center of a city. And the purpose of that is to maximize accessibility, to make sure that as many people can get those services and goods as possible. The area that is surrounding the central place is referred to as the market area or the hinterlands. Okay, so there's 2 really important concepts to understanding the central place theory, and those are range and threshold. Okay, so a range describes the average distance, the maximum distance that somebody is willing to travel in order to purchase a good or a service. Okay, so an example of that, I am not going to travel very far to buy a gallon of gas. I can get gas anywhere. So I'm not going to drive all the way to Charlotte to buy gas. I'm going to go right down the road 5 minutes from my house and fill up my tank of gas in the however many gas stations are there. Now, there are some things that I'm going to travel to Charlotte for, okay? If I want to watch the Panthers play, I'm going to travel an hour to watch the Panthers play because I can't get that anywhere else other than watching it on my TV. So it's the maximum distance that people are willing to travel to purchase a good or a service. Now, the threshold is also a very important concept with regards to where businesses are located. The threshold deals with the minimum number of people or the minimum market needed for a business or whatever to flourish, okay? So a lot of times when we find in the center of markets, we find businesses that are located there in the center for a specific purpose. Okay. Great example of that. If we think about Uptown Shelby, okay, Uptown Shelby, we've got Pleasant City, we've got Joe's Place, or now it's called Lafayette Street. We've got Toscano's, got a lot of great restaurants, but we also have some specialty shops. We have an olive oil and a wine shop there. We have an ice cream place. Those places are located in Uptown Shelby because Uptown Shelby has enough people. It has a minimum market needed to support those goods and services. Now, if we have an olive oil shop in Boiling Springs, probably not going to make it because we probably don't have the minimum number of people needed to bring that particular business there. So to think about range and threshold, got a couple of questions just for you to think about. Are you going to travel further to buy a new car or a week's worth of groceries? I don't know about you, but I go to Ingles on Saturdays or Sundays every day and I buy my week's worth of groceries. I'm not traveling a super far distance to buy those groceries because I can get them anywhere. Now, I will travel farther to buy a car. Black Beauty, y'all know that's my car's name. Black Beauty, I purchased Black Beauty in Gastonia. Why did I drive all the way to Gastonia to buy a new car? Well, it's because I got a better deal. And a car is a huge purchase. Are you going to travel further to see your family doctor or to a heart specialist? Obviously, the answer to that is a heart specialist, okay? Typically, you're not going to find specific doctors in smaller communities like Shelby, but you might find a heart specialist in Charlotte. Are you going to travel further to go to an elementary school or a high school? Why are there more elementary schools in our county? Well, it's because people are willing to travel a little bit further to go to a high school because it's larger and it's more centrally located. So those are all range and threshold that help us to explain the central place theory. So here is another model here. Just to show you, the central place theory is typically shaped in a hexagon. And the center of that is the biggest city in that particular area. This is the central place. The other areas are technically smaller centers, okay? So for example, these little dots right here, they might be smaller towns or smaller cities on the outskirts of this bigger city, okay? So let's say, for example, this star city could be considered Charlotte, okay? Other small center on the outside, maybe this is Gastonia, maybe this is Huntersville, maybe this is Belmont, maybe these smaller little communities that are closer to there, maybe this is Shelby, maybe that's Boiling Springs, okay? And this helps to explain the distribution patterns of where cities are located, as far as also the size of them. Typically, you don't see really, really large cities very close together. Think about North Carolina. The two largest cities in North Carolina, Charlotte and Raleigh, they're located about 2.5 to 3 hours apart from each other. The central place theory helps to explain that. All right, so some range examples that I have for you. I don't know about you, but I'm willing to drive an hour and 15 minutes to eat at the Cheesecake Factory. I love it. It's delicious. I'll wait in line for an hour to eat at the Cheesecake Factory. I'm not doing that to McDonald's. First of all, I'm not going to McDonald's, period, because some of y'all are all about some McDonald's. But why are people willing to drive an hour and 15 minutes to eat at Cheesecake Factory, yet not McDonald's? Range helps to explain that, okay? Range helps to explain the maximum distance people are willing to travel for a good or a service. So if you think about what are some restaurants, services, and stores that you would be willing to drive over an hour for, that helps to explain your range of service. Here's a couple of examples of things that I'm going to drive a little bit of time for. Clothing wise, I love me some Nike. Y'all know I'm shoe obsessed. I have a problem. Forever 21, I buy a lot of clothes there, as well as a lot of my outdoor stuff. I'll go to Academy because I can get it super cheap. I love traveling, and I love going to places. And obviously, here's the Biltmore House. Biltmore House is not something you can get to every day, but I'm willing to travel an hour to do things that I like to do. Recreational activities. Why am I going to travel an hour plus to go snowboarding? Well, I can't do that anywhere else. And then y'all know I'm all about some food. One of my favorite places at the moment to get something to eat is Bad Daddy's Burger Bar. It's in Gastonia. I'm willing to travel a little bit further there because that burger's amazing. Okay, another really important model that geographers use to help explain things is the gravity model. When you think about gravity, you think about the laws of gravity and what goes up must come down and things being attracted to each other. So the gravity model helps to explain the interactions between cities. Okay, it helps us to predict the best location for a particular service because that's going to maximize the number of people in that area. Also, that is related to the distance that people are going to be willing to travel. So according to the gravity model, the best location is going to be the one that minimizes distance to the most customers available. So let me give you a couple of examples of that. All right. Air traffic. Okay. Air travel. I took a look at the most, as far as number, most flights between certain cities in our world. And the gravity model helps to explain that. Okay. Why are two cities like Kuala Lumpur and Singapore? Kuala Lumpur is in Malaysia. Singapore is in Singapore. Those cities, if you look at this on the map right here, they're not very far apart from each other. But why is Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, why do they have the most flights between those two areas? Just in 2018 alone, there were 30,000 flights between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. The gravity model helps to explain that. Okay. The nearer the two cities are, the more likely they are to interact. Okay. So Kuala Lumpur and Singapore being close together means that they're going to be more likely to interact. Okay. Think about it too. Okay. The nearer cities are, the more likely they are to interact. How many of you live in Shelby or live in Boiling Springs and visit those places frequently? Okay. A lot of you do. The gravity model helps to explain that. Okay. So we're going to take a look at other examples of air traffic and flights. Okay. So here are the busiest airlines in the world. Okay. All right. So number one, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, about 30,000 flights a year. Hong Kong and Taipei. Taipei is the largest city in Taiwan. We know that Taiwan is right off the coast of mainland China, very close to each other. 28,000 flights a year between those two places. Jakarta is the largest city in Indonesia, which is also very close to Singapore, 27,000 flights. Hong Kong to Shanghai in China. Both of those places are in China. Jakarta to Kuala Lumpur. Indonesia to Malaysia. Seoul, South Korea to Osaka, which is in Japan. And then before we even get to the Western Hemisphere, we've got New York's LaGuardia Airport to Toronto. Those two places are very close to each other. So cities that are closer to each other are more likely to interact with one another. And the gravity model helps to explain that. Okay, so here is that once again. If we look on down, it's not until we get to JFK and London that we see another example of a Western Hemisphere flight. Now, I know you're going to say, well, London and JFK are not really that close to each other. It's about a 6-hour flight time between those two. But if you think about it, London and New York are two of the world's global cities. And because those two cities are so important and connected to each other, you're going to have a lot of flights between them. All right, guys, this is our final thing for today. So hopefully this made a little bit of sense to you. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and it's helped to teach you, and we will continue on with more later.